Let's call to order the September 15th meeting for Environmental Matters Committee. For the record, all the members are present. Can I get any kind of approval of the agenda?
Move we approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Let's see, minutes. The minutes from July 21st
Yeah.
to approve.
I motion that we approve the minutes of the last meeting, July 21st,
Second.
2021.
All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next up, we have a presentation. Dr. Nash, update on development projects. Thank you for joining us today.
All right, good afternoon. You have the August update in front of you. The main exciting update there is that we've issued permits for 39 Hudson Street, the Public Works garage facility, and that is under construction. That is probably the main update. 110 Compromise, we have a building permit under review for that project for the restaurant. And otherwise, we're mostly just waiting for revisions and chugging along. Are there any questions?
Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions. One on 110 Compromise. I ran into one of the owners at an event, and he said that it's taking an awful long time to get the permitting. I'm not really sure what the particulars are, and I'm certainly not castigating staff in any way, but I did promise him I would ask why it's taking so long.
Mm-hmm. So this project has gone on for a long time. They've submitted plans and then revisions and then revisions, and then what they've submitted for their building permit, however, is kind of an amalgamation of various versions that were all previously approved, but not all at the same time. So we have to go back into our file and say, okay, well, this feature here was approved. Okay, so we can go ahead with that. This feature here, was this approved? We don't think this was approved. So we have to go back to the architect and say, when did you get approval for this? We don't see it. Right. So it's just been a lot of back and forth because it wasn't a clean line from plan approval to permit submission.
Okay, so I'll try to calm him the next time I see him. And let's see, the other one, trying to find it now. I'll have to get back. Oh, I did want to ask about Rocky Gorge. We had that concept presentation, which was for affordable housing, which I thought was very positive. I think the pushback from the commission was that there needs to be more recreational space, so maybe fewer units. Are we hearing anything back from them?
No, we have talked to them. We had some concerns about the design, including the lack of recreation space. We also continue to have concerns about the proposed access off of T. Allen, and we want them to really put our design concerns aside for a minute and to really focus on that access, because if they are determined to have that access, we really need to explore that now before they spend a lot of other money on concept plans. If that's a deal breaker for them, then I want to see the evidence that that is going to be a safe interchange before we prove it. So they're getting their data together and their traffic research together to show that this would work and be a safe option.
And we've gone through that before with other proposals, but I did talk with Alderwoman Finlayson. One of the advantages I can see of moving a stoplight up there is clearly we're going to have to slower the speed rates further back towards Route 2 and Riva Road. And I can't think that that's a bad thing.
Right,
it
because
would-
people come around that corner awfully fast. But we wouldn't want there to be a queue that would back up from that intersection and then impact Route 2 where it crosses Aristide Allen.
So would they have room, because the last time I think there wasn't enough access lane to come off of Aristide Allen and prevent the queue, which is why it was eventually they were told no. Has anything changed in that regard?
Well, they're proposing to put their exit across from Godspeed Way,
Right.
or Blackwell, which could be ideal depending on the queuing situation, but it could work better than previous access points that have been proposed in the past. But it depends on a whole bunch of other data analysis that we don't have.
So this is the dilemma for planning, because on one hand, we want more affordable housing.
Right.
And on the other hand, we have to have safety. So
Yes.
thank you
Yep.
for that update.
And that is, I've mentioned to you before, my concern with having that queue back up into Route 2, because Route 2 at certain times of the day has its own queue that backs up almost up to Riva Road. It gets so long. So
Right.
certainly something to look at. But thank
Right.
you.
We don't want that to be worse.
Alderwoman Tierney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What was that?
I remember the other one.
Oh, light bulb went off. Park Place Hotel, the last action was July 30th. Is there a kink in that with the access road, or is it all systems go?
Well, we are very close to all systems go, and we are reviewing permits as well.
Okay, yeah, it looks pretty optimistic. And I have a historical question. I hate asking this, but I was driving by the workforce housing on West Street. What is that project? Not
2010 West Street, the town
yes,
court.
yes. Did that go through a no net loss on trees, or are there? There's no. Well, from West Street, when you look at it, it's so barren, and I don't know if there's baby trees there.
No, they had a forest conservation plan.
They did do a forest conservation.
Yep.
Well, that's all. Like, wherever
Okay.
they are, they replace them. But it does look so naked.
It's not finished. so-
True.
So they did use the new law, and
I don't remember, but I am pretty sure they came in under the new law.
It's
I
an
think so.
exciting
I
project.
think so,
Don't
too.
get me wrong. It's a great project.
Yeah.
Could you summarize for us Hillman Garage, where we're at and what needs to be done? Hillman Garage. I know it doesn't really concern environmental, but I think it's a really pressing project. I just want to make sure it's on track.
Right. It is pretty much on track. It's going to Planning Commission tomorrow night for site design approval. Fingers crossed.
Okay.
And then it will go to HPC for approval in their first meeting in October. Then they'll be able to apply for permits, and we'll try to get those out the door as soon as possible. We're going to first look at the demolition permit and get that underway so we can approve the demo, but maybe before we approve the grading and building, just so it doesn't,
that's
the
a great
grading
idea.
permit doesn't hold up the demo.
So demo will be on schedule. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much.
Hopefully late January.
I had a question. I know it's not in my ward, but
That's fine.
I saw in the newspaper that South Annapolis Yacht Center had
Yes.
some kind of appeal to the appeals board, I think it was, but
Building Board of Appeals.
Building Board of Appeals, September
what's-
29th.
I thought they withdrew their fence application. Is that for the fence or is that for something else?
So what first started is they submitted a permit for the fence and gate. We denied it, saying they needed to do a minor site design. They then submitted a minor site design, but held their appeal rights for the denial of the permit. So they submitted the site design, they then withdrew the site design, and now they're proceeding with their appeal of the denial of the fence permit.
I thought they only had like 30 days to appeal.
No, they preserved it. They did appeal,
How
and
do you
then they
preserve
just
it?
postponed it. So they did actually make the appeal application within the 30-day, or it's actually 15 days for Building Board of Appeals.
How do you, maybe this is more a question for Mr. Lyles, but I never heard of an appeal being preserved, a right to appeal being preserved Do you know do you have any more information on how that happened?
They just asked to postpone it, and we agreed.
I mean, it's laid out in the code, though, 30 days.
So we have a resolution speaking to that, which was postponed until the council meeting on the end of this month. And we were approached, there's also some apparently change in who the attorney is that's representing them. So my understanding is that Alan Hyatt withdrew the application for the fence, but Mr. Dales approached Alderman Savage and I and asked us to withdraw our resolution because the fence was no longer active, but it sounds like it is still active, that they're appealing the denial of the approval. And one of the things the council can do through resolution is to go on record on what we think the city policy should be. And our policy was that we didn't want that closed off to water access, and that's what that resolution was about. So what happens if on the 29th, the Building Board of Appeals, who I don't think till now has been involved in all of this falderall, grants them the appeal? Does that mean the fence goes forward?
Well, the Building Board of Appeals has to hear their appeal and has to rule one way or the other. If they are successful, it is possible, because I haven't seen the paperwork, so I don't know what they're appealing on, their basis, but they're appealing whether or not the denial was appropriate, and it could be remanding back to the planning commission, I mean, not the planning, but the planning and zoning department for further action. Depends on what they say. I don't think that they have a right to say that the fence should stay up. They would probably be sending back to the planning and zoning department some instructions for what should happen afterwards.
Yeah, it's hard for us to know what's going on. I can't even find their appeal.
I think it's pretty clear they want the fence.
Well, yeah.
Does the city have a say in terms, because for me anyway, and I think probably for some of us too, frustration is that I've seen plenty of citizens have the right to appeal be thrown out because it's over 30 days. So what I can't get my head around is how a developer somehow got to hold on to that right to appeal even after 30 days. There must be more to that. So is the city taking a stance at the Building Board of Appeals in the sense of trying to get this thrown out, or?
Well, I don't know what my staff attorney that was there, but it appears as though, based on what the director said, that they asked for additional time and they got the time. And the Building Board of Appeals, as the administrative body, can do what it wants to do with time, to submit things.
So the Board of Appeals, Building Board of Appeals, granted them, not planning and zoning, it was the Building Board of Appeals who gave them.
It would have had to have been. It would have had to have been the Building Board of Appeals decision. They have the authority to extend the time for an applicant to appeal or to apply to them for some reason in accordance with their rules.
All right, we'll have to look into that, because what if their rules contradict what's in the code in terms of
Right.
the length of time?
I'm having a hard time finding a record of any of this. That may be my deficiency, but is there some way we can get the materials sent to us, what the appeal is and what the request is of the Building Board of Appeals? But I mean, as we well know, this is quite a topical, hot button issue in fencing in any access to the water in the city, but certainly in Ward 8, this is an issue, and I'm having a hard time finding out what's going on. And again, I freely admit that could be my deficiency in using the system, but it would really be helpful to get the relevant materials.
I'll make sure we have everything up in Track It, and I'll let you know what the link is.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to solve this today, obviously, but if we could get any more information, I think for the committee to be great. I just want to try to understand it because, we're certainly getting contacted questions about this. All right, any other questions for Dr. Nash?
I have just a nerdy question. Is that fence considered an accessory use?
No, a fence is not a use.
Okay. Just curious. It's because that puts it in a different category. What was our basis for denial? And it was,
Our position is that a vehicular gate, changes the character of the project as far as site design is concerned, the aesthetic of the project, and that requires the minor site design. So we don't have an issue with the fence as long as it meets the code, which it actually doesn't. But we could allow a fence to be put up there that is similar to the fence they have now.
okay,
But what we want is to approve the gate itself
for access.
for site design, with site design. And we've done that in other projects, like when the Annapolis Yacht Club was redone.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Alderman.
So Eastport Yachting Center put up a fence, but it was only 4 feet. And it is on the property line. They went through the proper permitting process and it's there. And actually, I think the reasons for them wanting the fence were understandable, but they also never promised water access. And I think
We have also asked them to submit a minor site design application
because of
after
the
the
gate.
fact,
Right.
because of the gate.
But the fence at South Annapolis Yachting Center is 6 feet. But they're saying that they have some kind of an offset so they can go to 6 feet even though it's on the property, the front property line?
If it's at the setback line, they can go to 6 feet, but it is not currently in exactly the right place to be 6 feet. So they could go to 4 feet with a fence permit, or they could ask for an administrative adjustment for the 6 feet.
Okay.
I don't think they're interested in doing that. I think they'd be willing to put in to move the fence back.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Moving on.
I think that's all. Oh, wait. We'll do something else for plan and zoning. Find my agenda here. Well, do we want to jump around a little bit? Well, all right. Yeah. 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 Dr. Nash and Mr. Scott, I guess if you want to just come on back up, we could deal with some of the other issues that you two have come for. So the Harbor Line overhaul effort and the Watergate tree removal, whichever you want to take first, is fine.
Okay, did you also want an update on the comp plan?
Yes, but not at this meeting. We have to be out here by 5.
All right, that's fine.
Thank you, though.
No problem. All right, so for Watergate, they did remove some dead trees within the buffer without approval. They also did pruning, which doesn't actually need approval. But they did it to maintain their sidewalks and buildings. So we've been in touch with Watergate, or actually Nautilus, I guess is what it's called. And they're going to apply for a simplified buffer management plan for the removal of the 7 dead trees, and they're going to replant 7 trees. So we're in the process of working with them on that.
Okay, good. So the new owners agreed to the mitigation? Okay.
I mean, we don't have the buffer management plan in our office yet, but
Yeah.
they've been cooperative with
Working
us.
on it. Okay, good. That's
Yeah.
all I wanted to
Yeah.
know because I was hearing that they hadn't. So good job getting them to agree. That's good. Any other questions about this? Watergate? All
No,
right.
sounds like the trees were dead.
Yeah,
Well, they still have to be mitigated though,
Yeah, of
right?
course,
Even
yeah.
though they're dead.
yes. And for Title 15, which I have Kevin for his expertise, but I didn't know if you wanted a general update in our efforts to do that or more specific, but generally speaking.
General's fine.
Oh, okay. So Kevin and I meet every other week to look at Title 15, and we often just sort of shake our heads in dismay. But he actually has made a lot of progress restructuring it, so it makes more sense and is similar in some ways to Title 21. And so we can kind of process applications through 15 similar to the way we process applications in 21. The maps we know are so out of date. What we'd really like to do is go to a different method altogether, which we've looked at other jurisdictions around Maryland, and a lot of them have moved away from the maps, and it's just everything is determined in the field. That's how the county does it, and we think that makes a lot of sense. So we're working on the language for that. Working on language for lateral lines to make sure it's fair and equitable moving forward. You know, we know some people have stuff now that they've had for a long time, but it's not always fair to their neighbors. So we're, trying to figure out how best to balance grandfathering of existing rights and, what's really fair for a pretty crowded shoreline. And so we're hoping later this winter we'll have a draft that we can start showing around to City Council. And Ashley in the law office has been working with Beth Bellis on some of the other parts of Title 15 that aren't so much about port wardens, but are more about what the harbor master does. And they'll have some changes on that too. So it will be a pretty big change, which is why we knew we wouldn't have time to do it until next year. So that's our plan.
All right. Alderman Tierney?
Is the Coast Guard involved in that at all? No, or has to be, or I was just curious.
Not
about
in our
jurisdictions.
section. I don't know if,
No?
Kevin's saying no. Yeah.
And are they once you decide, are they like engineered drawings? Are they stamped? Does somebody take, ownership of them? Is there a stamp of some sort or?
Well,
authority?
it would be like any critical area plan where the 100-foot buffer really has to be determined in the field. So we have maps, but it's like, don't really look at these maps. You have to look at the field and the field conditions, because a lot of things change over time. Where mean high water is exactly changes
Sure.
over time. And like the shape and size of wetlands changes over time. So, we have people who know how to do the Port Warden's maps now. It would be the same people. It's just they would be determining it based on a formula that's in the code, not a map that's in the code. So there's a formula of, well, it's 300 feet from the middle of the channel. So, something like that. Okay. So then they would just have to do the measurements and then show on what they've submitted that they're in this area. So it's
more for us, for our boundaries, if you will. It's not something that is part of mapping the Chesapeake Bay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
right.
That's where I'm headed. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
But following along that line, it is for us collectively. It's for the city in managing both the harbor line and the lateral lines. But as Dr. Nash said just a few seconds ago, it's also for fairness to all the property owners. I thought that we had gotten, I think it was in 2018, the map, and Sean Wampler had done a GIS mapping to all of the piers and pilings and even shallow waters and everything. Are you saying that that is already out of date? I mean, 2018 isn't that long ago.
Well, no, that is actually, the 2018 aerial data is really good, and that is what we would use as our baseline going forward. So everyone would need to use that imagery going forward, and then that's how we would know what was grandfathered, what was not, what was legal, what wasn't.
Right, and I thought that was the plan, and it makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. You can't roll back 20 years of somebody having things, but I want to talk about 310 3rd Street specifically, but more generically, when Cardi Templeton was in for her change to her harbor line, and she was looking along that section of Spa Creek and looking at the lateral line that comes off of the end of Fifth Street, which looks like an elephant's trunk. I just don't see how that can make sense to anybody. So it seems to me like we really need to go back and just sort of throw all of those lines away and redraw them. But, and this is a softball question, that seems like a big engineering effort. That seems like something that we really ought to have a contract for somebody like Bay Engineering or whoever the right people are. But that's really going to be a huge effort. And the lines for 310 3rd Street and the lines for 222 Severn cross and close off the water access for the end of 3rd Street. So the code says, well, you have to at least redo the lines to allow a 25-foot opening. I cannot believe that's a unique situation.
I don't think so.
Right, so-
It's unusual, but it's not unique.
So I guess the first question is, are we still, I think the applicant on 310 3rd Street postponed till the end of this month. Are they going to be coming back in? And if so, do we need to, how are we going to figure that out? Because where they want to put their floating dock, and look, that's a provisioning company that is part of our maritime. And part of our maritime industry, and we don't want to squelch them. I don't want to squelch them. On the other hand, I think we have money in the budget to put a floating dock at the end of 3rd Street. It's going to be the floating dock to nowhere, because they're either going to be going through Carty's new harbor line or they're going to go through theirs. So,
Well, we're hoping right now that 222 and 310 can work something out that will protect the city's lines as well. So the three of us kind of need to work together because that is a pretty unusual situation.
but that hearing's coming up. We got to be doing that soon.
It's going to be postponed until, I guess, their following meeting. So it's been postponed to, I
Until
guess, the October
October?
meeting? October meeting.
Okay, well, and I'm not sure I can, but I would certainly be willing to help in any way. I think the actual owner of 310, as opposed to the business, seems like a really reasonable person. I think he was kind of taken surprise, but I do hope we can come to some sort of an agreement to solve that immediate issue so people can get out to the water there. But then going back to the lateral lines writ large, I bet Kevin has looked at it and has nightmares about it. But I mean, how many lateral line knots do we have to untie? I mean, I just can't help but believe that's going to be a huge job.
That's true, but we'll have to do it case by case, and we'll have to rely more on the applicants to do more of that work for us.
That gives me a little concern because I think we got to the knotty lines case by case, and I would rather that we think about a generic sorting out of.
That's true, but there was also a lot of variances to the code along the way that hopefully we will have a uniform and consistent application of language that is more clear going forward.
Well, I want to go on record that this is a very much of an interest to me. I wouldn't say concern, just interest, but I understand a little bit about the complexities, not as much as you do or Kevin does, but if you need help, we are getting into the next budget. And I know planning and zoning sort of seems to be at the end of the line on budget help, but this is a biggie. And this affects everybody who has property along the water is going to be affected by this. And so I think we need to get it right. So appreciate
definitely.
the effort and would like to support in any way I can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nash. Thank you, Mr. Scott, for coming on by this afternoon. Appreciate the update. All right, and next we have a Parkside Preserve update. I'd like to invite Mr. Johnson Mr. Bryce, if you'd like, Ms. Guile, anybody who would like to come up regarding this project. And I just want to provide a little bit of opening remarks. I've been wanting to do a follow-up on this, follow-up to some of the issues we had in July, just to see what may have been done in the time being. And I do want to emphasize by starting off that, it's not just me or even us who have concerns about this. And I know Mr. Bryce is well aware of the history of this project, but it's been around for a while. There was a large community effort over many, many years to try to protect the forest. And, so I've been getting, and I've been intimately involved with it even from the review days. So the public often does come to me because they know my history with it. And believe me, I'd rather not have to hear about this project one more day, but unfortunately they come to me and expect me to get some responses. And so they've also been contacting Alderman Schandelmeyer, since his ward's right next door. But that's why it took a lot of effort from even the previous administration, a lot of people involved, to try to get this land protected. So that's why I think there are a lot of eyes and concerns about this. And just to summarize a bit, in terms of highlighting some of the issues that we had is, one of the big issues is it did take 9 days to get compliance at this site. And yet all the tools we have in our arsenal were not used to get earlier compliance. I, for one, and I think probably speak for the rest of the committee, that's not acceptable in terms of that 9-day period. I hope none of you think that's okay. And so I guess one of the things I just want to kind of get out today is just what, hopefully you agree, but also more importantly, moving forward, what are we doing to make sure this isn't happening again or won't happen again? Because we really do want to avoid this. Like I said, I don't want to hear about this project again if I could help it. But I also want to relay that I think we all here, we want to do what we can. If the code's not going in the right direction, if it needs clarification, happy to work with you. If we need to adjust any of the performance standards with the city manager, happy to do that. So that's just basically my little opener there. So I just wanted to also turn it over to you, anybody who has any kind of update or report and thing in terms of what may have happened since July.
Good afternoon. So I'll let Director Johnson speak to the how rapid the response was. But when we came before City Council to give a report on what had occurred at the site, I did say that we were going to do a comprehensive review of the site, which we had done. Director Johnson had been on site with stormwater engineers that day, and I believe it was the next day we were there again with the city manager and walked the site with Reliable, the entire site, and looked at all the other problems. I'd stopped by in the morning. They were already at work before 8 a.m. on rectifying the situation, and by 11:30 they were almost completely done. I think by that afternoon about 1:30, everything that was required, the list that had been made by Director Johnson and the stormwater engineers earlier in the week had been completely complied with. Nevertheless, that day that we were on site, we did notice 4 violations, and there was $2,000 in fines issued that day. There had been a call to City Council from some of the residents and some of the aldermen and women that there be a stop order on the site until all the violations were rectified. Because we knew that bad weather was coming, it ended up not being as bad as, thankfully, as the forecast had projected. Director Johnson did say that rather than having till Friday to correct, he wanted it corrected by, I believe, Wednesday afternoon. we had discussed that and thought that by Wednesday afternoon, we should move it up to that date. And Director Johnson relayed that to Reliable, and they did comply with that. So what that required is Reliable to virtually have all hands on deck to meet that Wednesday deadline. And so it amounted to a stop work order in the end. There's nothing else we could have done to expedite it any further. Since that time, Director Johnson has taken it upon himself. He stepped up the inspections at the site. He had our environmental compliance inspector out there twice a week and requiring the site to be buttoned up before storms, making sure that was happening, and then inspecting afterwards. And our stormwater engineers were also on site inspecting, which usually does not happen at development sites unless there's really a problem. And we deemed it was necessary in this instance. But since that time, Director Johnson has taken it upon himself to develop a new procedure for sediment erosion controls at all future development sites, starting with the Public Works Maintenance Facility. And he can speak in more detail to it, but it has enhanced levels of oversight to ensure that sediment and erosion control requirements are met, that they're more robust, and so that we can prevent any, not only just violations, from occurring as the silt fence down, but any runoff or damage to the environment is the most important thing. And these include taking photographs and drone inspections as well, to have the twice a week inspections by the environmental compliance officer, and then in between that, having stormwater engineers on site to inspect, as well as requiring the city owner's representative to have weekly inspections, and then daily inspections are required by the site operator. So if Director Johnson wants to add anything to that, he may want to, but it's a much more detailed and robust requirement that Public Works is going to implement. And the second thing I want to mention before Director Johnson provides you any more detail is that he and I have also talked about the stormwater requirements in general, and are they up to par with what's happening with climate change? We're frequent and more intense rainfall, and he does not believe they are. And he will embark on a review of the stormwater requirements this fall and proposed revisions to build resiliency. That's what we want. We want to be resilient. We want to prevent environmental degradation from happening in the first instance. So we'll take on that project. I think it's long overdue, and I was very pleased that Director Johnson sees that need.
Thank you, Deputy City Manager Good evening, council members. As the Deputy City Manager pointed out, the delay in sort of getting to full compliance really was generated by my desire to get a comprehensive understanding of the defects that are on the site. I did not feel that it was the best approach to tackle deficiencies on a piecemeal basis. So I had staff do a comprehensive, or I asked the stormwater engineers to go out and do a comprehensive investigation of everything on the site that should be there, everything, pursuant to stormwater sediment control. And with that document in hand, with that data in hand, we were then able to make what I felt was an appropriate level of fine that should be applied, as well as, more importantly, the remedy that the contractor was required to comply with. So that way, the reason for doing it that way, besides sort of just being thorough, was also to put the contractor on notice that we are sort of taking a very comprehensive way of looking at the sites, and that there's nothing that will slip through the net that we're sort of designing for that site. One of the things that was mentioned that I did also have discussed with staff is that I don't really feel that the current inspection minimums which the state requires are sufficient for our sites. So the protocol, we're coming up with a new protocol, which it's still in its draft form. We're almost close to finalizing it, but it will be tried out at 39 Hudson, which is the next big project to go. And it will become the archetype for, to be followed for development sites of a certain size, If you're doing like a storefront, it wouldn't apply to that, but if you're doing a few acres, it would trigger that. So it requires multiple layers of inspections. We feel that with projects which we have a very environmentally sensitive community and active community, that a project page is probably an appropriate way of relaying information, as opposed to, they can always, of course, go to their elected officials or come to Public Works, but it's less efficient than if there's one portal by which everyone can kind of see what is going on. And it will sort of, diminish the perception that somehow the city is trying to hide anything. We are totally transparent. We really want to make sure that all the reports, everything that we find, we will report on that portal. There'll be footage from drones, which will see from a bird's eye view everything, as well as with the enhanced inspections of the engineers, third-party inspectors, and the required inspection of the superintendent for the contractor. It is going to be really difficult for any violation to get by for any length of time. It's not that you couldn't have a storm whereby a silt fence, super silt fence came down, but it will be picked up very quickly and corrected judiciously, sort of very rapidly. So that sort of gives a very robust backbone to the inspection protocol. But as Deputy City Manager Guild mentioned, there is a further problem wrong with maybe wrong isn't the right word, there's a further enhancement needed to our stormwater statutes, in that many stormwater statutes, particularly legacy ones, are built for quantity and quality. All right, those are the two driving engines of the legislation. They're not built currently for resilience. And as you saw recently with what happened with the unfortunate, albeit fortunate in a sense, tornado that did not kill anyone, you're noticing that our weather patterns are becoming stronger, more unpredictable. The American Society of Civil Engineers are very concerned about what is going on with wind loads, with flood loads, snow loads, that the codes which were written in the 60s and 70s are, when compared statistically to what is happening today, are sort of not aligning in the way that is giving them a sense of comfort. I think we all know, and we're all environmentally sensitive people, that this is related in some way to the climate change that is occurring. So our future stormwater codes have a resilience component to it. And that is going to take some work on our part. The staff will do the work. We would do work sessions with the appropriate committees and probably the general counsel or whichever is the appropriate oversight body once we are further along. We'd also include our environmental partners locally in helping us to make sure that the correct resilience criteria are built into the codes, because this is likely to be the new normal going forward, unfortunately. As we tick towards 2 degrees centigrade, we're going to have drastic changes in weather. The hurricane, NOAA is warning that a Cat 5 hurricane today may be a Cat 4 within 10 years, or a Cat 3 within 10 years. That is serious business. That is something that coastal cities like ours really need to pay attention to and sort of adjust our legislation to take that into account. And I'm not here coming out as the harbinger of doom and gloom, but I'm sort of sounding what I think is a sober and prudent approach that we have an opportunity. We do have some time to sort of make some adjustments to our codes so that future developments or the retrofits done within the city have resilience as a component of it. A few years ago, NIST, which has its campus in Gaithersburg, started a panel called the Resiliency Panel. The panel did not work well. They abandoned it after about a year of working on it. I think it was a bit too all-encompassing. But I think, were on the right track in terms of looking at severe storms and how municipalities would view resilience in a comprehensive way. So I'm sort of giving a lot, but it's something that we will be working on with that. Just to give a bit of an update on the citations, 2 citations were mentioned. They were issued on July 29th. And then subsequent to that, on August the 17th, we issued another $1,000 citation. And this is for an earth berm failure following a rain event, that the stormwater infrastructure that had been put in did not properly convey the flow and caused some silt to sort of like, travel off into an area that it shouldn't have. So we are sort of taking, we sort of put the contractor on notice. We are vigilantly inspecting the site and doing the best that I think that we can to ensure that, the problems that have been on the site are behind us and that we have a new path forward. I just wondered if I could respond to some of the ideas that had come up with the hardscape path. And I sort of researched this somewhat. One of the issues with the hardscape path that is in the this passing through the wetlands, even though it's only in the wetland for a fairly short area, lies with the weight of the equipment that the city of Annapolis has to use or currently uses to maintain its sewers. The Vector truck, the big vacuum trucks that clean the sewers, their weight unloaded is 43,000 pounds. That is 23 and change tons of weight, 22 and change, almost 22 tons of weight, right? It's a very heavy vehicle. It's a major piece of equipment. That cannot run on a green surface, particularly where you have perched water or sodded or soggy kind of soil will be very disruptive. You have a lot of silt displaced. There were ideas of plastic matting. One of the great concerns with that is the prevalence of PFAS, the PFAS, which is the polyfluoroalkyl substances. Now, even though PFAS is banned in the United States, much of the plastics that are available in the United States are not manufactured in the United States. That's the loophole. They come from countries which don't have the environmental legislation that the United States does have. And those leach into the water and are, I think they call them lovingly, forever chemicals. There's no degradation. If it gets into anything, your body, anything, it's with you forever. It does not, its degradation rate is extremely slow. So it effectively lasts forever. And many turf fields, I don't know if you know, like these synthetic turf fields, face that problem. There's been a big push to remove the PFAS from the plastics, the type of plastics, polymers that are used. And they're not something that we'd recommend at all to be used in our city. So it's not really an appropriate type of matting that I would say. The timber matting, or there was also an idea of a bridge. Now keep in mind again the weight of the vehicle. The weight of the vehicle is such that it must then carry what AASHTO has classified as the HS20, and I would bump it up because the vehicles are getting heavier, HS25 load. That is a substantial structure. That is a bridge, similar to the bridges that cross our interstates or carry us over the interstates. And that's a highly disruptive construction. It's a major piece of construction. It's very disruptive. It also is highly impervious, and you will get more water shed from that than if you had a gravel path. Even though it is impervious, it is not as impervious as a concrete bridge. If there are degrees of imperviousness to a degree. In other words, you may never can see that. It's sort of more granular. So even though it sheds water, it sheds less water than a concrete deck. So I spoke also with the sewer supervisor, and who has more than 30 years of maintaining our sewers, and asked him if there was any way within which he could function with less of a gravel path if he had to maintain, or when he has to maintain that sewer. And he took a good look at it, and he said really that given the entry points, he needs the full path to be able to maintain it. Now, it is new, and it's I guess you would call it like a random failure. Is like a random variable. It's like me asking, when would your car engine fail? You couldn't give me a definitive answer, but you know that if you do preventative maintenance on it, that you prolong the life. But at some point, it could fail tomorrow, it could fail 10 years from now, but you can't actually say exactly when. It's not deterministic, it's a stochastic type of an event. And I think that really the approach that we have to take is that we have to build maintenance into whatever we build. One of the errors that municipalities sometimes make is to build and forget, to build something and then forget that maintenance is going to be it's going to last a long time, 50 years, whatever it is. And over that period of time, for it to function well, it needs to be maintained. So what we have done is for the minimum width that accommodates the type of equipment that we operate, knowing well that I can't answer and say exactly when maintenance will be necessary, but it will be necessary during the life of that sewer and the health and safety of that community, that we have to have a means to get our Vector equipment in there to maintain it. And the road has to be strong enough to carry the weight of the kind of equipment we use. There's no alternative type of equipment that is available in our inventory for us to use, or that even can reach that length. I think it's about 1,800 feet of, something like that, 1,800 feet of sewer line. So that, the pressure to pull that requires a big pump. I mean, it's just like a pump on a truck, but it's a big horsepower pump to be able to have the suction head to pull stuff or push stuff or jet stuff through a line of that length. So I think that, unfortunately, I mean, the fact that it's built where it is, we just have to have a means to maintain it. I'm not sure that I can sort of, with any integrity, sort of tell you that there's a greener way to sort of deal with it. I mean, it has to, the strength of the truck, the strength of the road to carry the weight of the truck is the driving factor. And the options for those, I think the gravel path is the least obtrusive. You really don't want a bridge built in there unless you want to spend a lot of money, and it will be pretty ugly, right? I think would spoil it even more and be super expensive to build.
Well, I guess I still have some questions on that, because, I mean, I know you're saying it's hard to attach any kind of maintenance expectation on this. I'm very familiar with Vector trucks. We use them all the time to jet rod our stormwater lines or just Vector out blockages. And I know they can be very difficult once they're off the road, off a maintained path. But, if this is something that we might need to do every 10, 20 years, when there is an alternative to put down, I think there are alternatives. We have a lot of new developments put in grass pavers for fire trucks, for fire lanes, which presumably will be able to carry a fire truck fully loaded with water. And we use temporary paths to have huge dump trucks take imbricated or class 3 riprap, which weighs many tons, down paths. So there are alternatives for even temporary. But if this is, again, it's a balance, right? I mean, if this is something you might need to do 15, 10 years, 20 years, I don't know. I think maybe we don't need a stone path, but that's really my question, because I know most of our older sewer utility system, most likely, I think, doesn't have that kind of path. I mean, there's one right next to my community, it follows the river, and there's no access. And I know that provides issues, but I'm just trying to find a middle ground between something completely built out to an ideal for something that may not actually ever happen, with something where we can at least be prepared. If it does happen, we can lay down a path, or at least have something a little bit more green, because it's just going to be really odd to have this run through a park. Maybe we can incorporate it into some kind of pedestrian multi-use path that's going to go through there. That could be kind of a win-win. But it just seems a bit, so I guess that's my first question. I'll let you answer. I mean, do you have any other idea for maintenance besides, I mean, how often do you have to use the Vector trucks on our existing sewer
I'm not
infrastructure?
sure that I could, I'll give it to Sam in a minute, but I'm not sure that really you could say, because of the, it's not something that fails with any, like a clock or something like that. It's like a random event. It could fail 5 years after it's put in, it could fail, you could have a clog a week after it's put in, or it could go for 20 years with no problem. It's not really something that's deterministic in that way, but I'll give it.
Thank you, Director Johnson. One of the situations that you have is there's the catastrophic failure. Everything is blocked, it backs up, it's going to cause problems all the way back up into the subdivision, and you're going to have a sewer spill associated with that. That is the thing we try to avoid. We try not to have that occur. So we're not looking at the catastrophic failures anymore as a direct thing we're trying to maintain. Right now, what our sewer crew does is they try to clean every sewer on a 3-year basis. So if it is a good sewer that is not having problems, they try to do that every 3 years. If it is a sewer that has problems, they try to do it more frequently. And it progressively gets shorter and shorter periods. One of the reasons we do this is because when you get into some of the lawsuits that we get into because of sewer backups, one of the questions that is asked, do you have a preventive maintenance program? And so being able to get to these sites to maintain on a regular basis is very important to us. Now, what we have learned over the years, because we have grown over the years, and it's important to always remember this, a lot of what was just woods and no one cared about are now housing communities or back up to housing communities. And so we have gone from some of our thought process, run it back to the woods, we won't worry about it, because when many of these sewers went in, it was pre-EPA. And so if you had a sewer spill, no one cared. But that's very important now that we try to prevent those sewer spills. So we have gone over the years from very narrow easements, in easements that were difficult to access, 5 and 10 foot easements. We've now gone to 15-foot easements, so we have better access. We've also, there's some discussion about going to even wider easements than that. When looking at projects where if we are building through the woods, which is what we have at Parkside Preserve, making sure that there is a path for that future maintenance, because we know that future maintenance is going to be coming down the line. If major maintenance or just the routine maintenance associated with making sure that line is cleaned every 3 years.
Yeah, just a quick question on this. What do you do on some of these lines? Just as an example, the one near my community where there's no access path, and right now we do have maintenance issues on there. But and I know you're looking to line that pipe, but what do you do when that comes time? And I think the line was just cleaned before it was video inspected. So what was done? I didn't have a chance to get down there and look myself, but do you know what was done in that case when you have infrastructure that doesn't have these access paths? What do you typically do?
We have been going through. First of all, we've been very fortunate because one of the property owners is the SPCA, so they've been providing some access for us. But we get into the situation of having to get not only, we have to go to some of the property owners and get rights of enter simply to get onto the property, because you're starting off with a 10-foot easement, and how do you get back there from that? Some of these cases we're doing the lining in 2 directions, so we're meeting at a central manhole that's back in the woods, but it becomes very difficult to do that. If I remember correctly, and I could be incorrect about this, the sewer in your community runs along the waterfront, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So in order to access that, normally you would go, well, you would be able to easily access it, but to get to these sewers, we have to go to the individual property owners, get permission to go back, because there is no access way from the street. Because these sewers went in prior to Georgetown Grove being built, because Georgetown Grove was built, I want to say, probably 1988. Those sewers went in the same time the Belmont Pumping Station went in, and so we're looking back in the 60s for those.
Yeah.
So, it was, woods. No one cared. And the other thing, and I know that many will find this hard to believe, but waterfront at one time was not considered prime property.
Yeah.
Okay? It was, it was junk. It smelled. People didn't want to be there. And since then, it has changed to prime property, and now it is much more difficult to look at the maintenance aspects associated with it. And where do many of your sewers run? Because they're gravity driven, they run along the creek bottoms and along the shoreline.
Yeah. And
as I talk this way instead of into the microphone.
That's okay. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bryson. If the preventative maintenance program makes sense to me, I think I think that's important for us to do if we can maintain that. My only request would be is if we can look at, again, doing something a bit more green, like something similar we've done for fire trucks. I'm assuming that the weight's probably similar, or come up with something creative since it'll be a park. I saw two hands. I saw them in our net first. And
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm kind of wondering if this is a unique situation, or are we going to have similar problems elsewhere in the city? You were just mentioning the sewer line for Ward 7. Because then it seems that there might be another kind of alternative. And maybe I watched Victory at Sea too much as a boy, but I think of all of the CBs where they have these steel plates that they're very open, that they put down for runways very quickly, and then they picked them back up, or bridges that would shoot across the water for temporary transportation when the bridge was done. Are there systems that can be deployed upon need and then retracted, stored, and then put another place? Or is Parkside Preserve so unique that it needs a unique solution? I've seen those sewer trucks. They are mammoth. And listening to them pumping away. So I understand the weight problem. I'm glad you brought that to our attention. But I'm just wondering if this is something where we can take a broader look at potential need across the city, and whether there are things that can be temporarily deployed and then retracted, or is this pretty much a one-off kind of situation?
I'm Alderman. I do believe that the temporary solutions that you mentioned that the CBs use, whether they're Bailey bridges or the plates for runways, those can be used, but they're not as they are more disruptive than meets the eye.
Okay.
In other words, to haul in steel plates, which are quite heavy themselves, you have to bring in a low boy truck. You have to bring in some kind of mechanism, a crane, to offload them, tie them together so that you have a proper mat. Now, under battle, the Army engineers are not so concerned about the damage that they're causing. They just want to get troops and material across into the combat zone or beachhead or wherever it is they're going with the stuff. But I don't think that it's as clean a solution as, it would seem like you would have to have multiple pieces of equipment to be able to sort of set up that temporary one-time use and then to pick it back up. It would seem to be more disruptive than if we had some kind of a permanent hardscape. And it's something that we could look at to see. I mean, they would have to be stone. Whether or not the surface appears stony, the base has to be strong enough to carry the weight of the vehicle. So whether or not the surface for aesthetic purposes appears green, that's something that we could look at, but the structure has to be the structure because the weight of the truck is significant, and we really don't want silt going anywhere.
These were structures carrying tanks, so I mean, but I hear your point that the temporary solution may be more destructive than the permanent solution. So I just, sitting here as an amateur thinking about it and wondering if we didn't have some alternative kinds of things to deploy, and sounds like might not work. Even if it was cost effective, it still might not do what we're trying to avoid, which is damaging tree roots and disturbing things.
Right, exactly. I do believe we would get more complaints because once you deployed it, it would, you know, the military is not in the environmental business, and when they're fighting a war or if they're under fire, they just want to build it quickly, and it's quite disruptive. You have heavy pieces of equipment to load heavy pieces of equipment, so it's a different focus than ours. We're trying to minimize the disruption to the environment. I'm not sure that's their focus.
Alderman?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. There's a lot that you spoke of and a lot to unpack, so my questions aren't in order of priority, just as I wrote them down. When you talked about stormwater management and coordinating with climate change and adding resiliency to it, how far ahead do we want to go from MDE or the county? I would suspect, I mean, there's a lot of literature I'm reading in ASCE that this is a big deal right now, that you know, it's known that we have to work with stormwater management procedures to deal with the flooding and all the impact of climate change. But I just feel like we shouldn't do this alone, that we should coordinate. I know the county has a very extensive stormwater management program. Are we working with them, or do you know what I'm asking? I just don't think this is...
No, I understand. I understand exactly. It's an excellent question. We have not started the process yet, but in the execution of this, we will work with the regulators, we will work with the environmental community, as well as the local authority, the council, to sort of build a document that has appropriate levels of resilience for our community. And it would sort of be based heavily on existing standards, and the federal partners who are far more technical in terms of those areas. They're focused like areas like NOAA. They have a clearer picture of where things are going,
right?
And they would sort of inform the kind of work that we do, NIST, and so who have done a fair amount of work on this already.
Right.
So we're not reinventing the wheel. We're sort of just going to take and pull together a lot of what exists.
Good. I just didn't want to be alone in the wilderness.
Oh, no,
on
no.
this.
No, it's not a good place to be.
So I'm a little confused on the, are you speaking of a Vactrax truck? Is that what you're speaking of, or what I'm familiar with? It's a Vactrax, or it's got, you know, the treads, right?
No, it's the big truck that you see. It has like a multi-axle. It has a big tank on it and a hose.
Right. Kind of looks like
But have you
It's
looked
the
at
truck we use to fill all the barriers.
Right, but speaking of environmentally, you know, issues, aren't there trucks now that distribute the load better, doing the same operation? I mean, there has to be. I mean, that could distribute the load instead of, you know, just the dead load as you speak of. I mean, there's situations where, I'm sure there's situations where we don't have the capability of building a temporary road, and we have to go on, you know, rough terrain, et cetera. I mean, is this the best we're getting from the subcontractor?
We do all of this maintenance unless it is extremely large ourselves. So the lining and the cleaning of the sewer lines associated with lining the lines, we have a contractor who does that.
Right.
The maintenance, the normal day-to-day maintenance, is done by our sewer crew using a VACCON. I think that they have one VACCON, and then the storm drain crew has a VACCON. Those are most of the work is on streets. You know, that's where we do an awful lot of our work. So the vehicle you have that you're looking at is a regular wheeled vehicle.
Yeah.
I know that Vector does make a tracked vehicle as well.
Right.
I have not looked at that because in preparing to discuss this, I went and looked at the VACCON site to get some of the weights to get a sense of this. But
Yeah.
I know that they have a tracked vehicle, but how appropriate that would be for city work, because most of it's
I know.
on street, because you've
I
got,
know.
you're going A to B, you don't necessarily
Yeah.
want to use a tracked
So
vehicle to
but what
do
is,
that.
yeah, I don't mean it. What is the solution then? I didn't hear a solution on the road, or whatever we're calling it, the path, or,
I think it has to be
But it's
strong
not a road.
enough to
So-
carry the load. I mean, based on the load distribution, that the existing equipment that we have, the wheel spacings and the
Yeah.
load per
Yeah.
axle,
right?
right, it will turn out that the most severe load would be to just use the AASHTO HS 20 or 25 model, road truck model that is standard for designing bridges and roads in the United States and Canada.
Wow.
That turns out to be very effective in terms of designing a safe vehicle. It's not efficient to design a road for a specific piece of equipment, because VACCON could stop making that and
Right.
your wheel loads could be wrong. So using the AASHTO load model, which is
Right.
just it's not a rail truck, but it's a model developed which simulates the kinds of loads that these trucks would impose.
Right.
That is what the road would have to be capable of bearing.
So,
So it would be, a gravel path, or as I was mentioning to Alderman Savage, it's possible that the surface could simulate some kind of grass, but it has to have structure beneath it
sure. Yeah.
that is capable of carrying this weight.
So who makes that call?
That's something that I guess we could, I'm assuming, discuss with the developer. Right.
Discuss that with the developer. Currently, the plans call for, if I remember correctly,
I go into
currently, the plans call for a 10-foot wide, 6-inch thick stone roadway, CR6 roadway. That is about the minimum thickness you can get, and probably what we would do when we actually get ready to do that is have them put some fabric underneath of it, because that gives you a little bit more structure to your roadway. But one of the things that, and we see this in Parkside Preserve as the native soil. We see this in Hunt Meadows. That ground out there has got a lot of perched water, which means that the ground is wet. One of the big enemies of roadways is water. So, you have to make sure you have a structure that is adequate to carry your vehicles back through there. Whether it's a stone path or putting down something like the concrete pavers, the grasscrete pavers, but all of those things also have a cost associated with them. And we're talking about, I want to say, probably a 1,000-foot run. So if I go to and this doesn't mean we can't go to the developer, but if I go to the developer and say, I want you to put in 1,000 feet of the grass pavers at whatever that cost is going to be, he is probably not going to feel real warmly towards that, because it is such an expensive item, and it was not originally proposed in the plans. So he has a development, he has approved plans, and he wants to go ahead with those plans. They have been, and I want to stress this, they have been very cooperative with us. We have not met resistance from them on word one on things that we have discussed with them, additions we have asked them to do. So they have been a very good cooperative developer. But I think if you say to them, hey, I want you to do this amount of additional work instead of putting down a gravel or a stone roadway, I'm not sure that's something that we can force on them.
Well,
We can
don't
ask
have
them,
to-
but I don't think we can force it on
We
them.
can put that on our final punch list, and they have to
So-
get that if they want final approval.
Just humor me for a second. Are we the owner? I'm really confused on the the framework of this project, who's the owner and who's the contractor and who holds is there a general contractor?
Okay, it's a joint venture of a number of individuals.
Okay,
Part of that joint venture are some of the principals in reliable contracting.
okay,
Reliable contracting, as a very large company, is doing a significant amount of the civil work.
yes,
Turn your mic on, Sam. Turn your mic on.
Doing a significant amount of the civil work.
Right.
So they're doing the roads, curb and gutter, sanitary sewer, water, stormwater management. So they're doing all of that. There are a number of building partners, companies that are going to build the houses that are also involved in that. They not necessarily started their stuff yet.
right,
As in all development, we do not take over the roads or the storm drains or the water or the sanitary sewers until the project is completed, the punch list is done, and the maintenance bond expires a year afterwards.
Okay.
So what will happen is when they are finished, and I'm going to say this is probably going to be in about 3 years, because that's about how long a development of this size will take. There will be a final inspection that will be done to see how how what was done compares with the approved plans to pick up any defects.
yeah,
After that is done, they will go through and they will fix any of those defects. They will go on a maintenance bond for a year. At the end of the year, all of the utilities will be conveyed to us, as well as the easements that those utilities sit in. So right now, the easement where this work is going on, that we're talking about, where this road will be, that resides in the ownership of the conglomerate that is doing this development. When the project is finished, that will be conveyed to us for maintenance and for ownership of those easement rights that overlay whoever owns the underlying fee simple. And I'm not sure in this case whether that will be the HOA or other parties.
I thought that was us, though, because the city, under the last administration, negotiated for that chunk of forest to be turned over to the city at some point. So presumably that entire chunk of forest, including the land where the sewer is going to be we probably won't even need an easement. It's going to be our property.
That
I don't see why they would carve that out and not give it to us, and then we'd have to just keep ownership on that land because they'd be turning over the sewer to us anyway. So I think that's going to be our property and our.
I am not clear on that, because when I read the original draft deed on that conveyance, that draft deed was only the lots, which surprised me. It did not include the water, it did not include the roadways that went back through there. I do not know if that has changed. I have not read that deed recently, so I can't confirm or deny that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It might be. Can we get some
yeah. No, I don't want to take
clarification
it,
from?
but this is the last thing I want to
yes.
say, and this is I just from the little I know about this
But the maintenance,
project.
that's going to be ours.
Yeah, I think this is all a recipe for disaster. The fact through all of this that that we don't require, whoever the owner is, that we don't require someone on site, a trailer. I've never heard of a project in my 30 years of construction. I never heard of a project starting without a job site setup and a trailer there so that there's a point of contact. All of this work going on, and there's no one there. You run up and find the developer somewhere and say, it just seems so unconventional to me, and I'm very concerned about our liability, and nobody's in charge. You should demand a trailer on that job site. You know what I'm saying. You have to agree with that.
I understand what you're saying. On a development job site, the office trailer is a function of what that developer decides he wants, particularly today with cell phones. the need is not as great as it used to be because
Not
you
when
had
you're
to have
dealing with a
somebody.
massive site project like this.
Excuse me?
This
sorry.
project, the most significant operation right now is the site work, and that there's.
Most of the big ones have them. I mean, the rec center, when that was being built, that had a trailer. Oberry Court, when that was getting reconstructed. All the ones I could think of have had
There should be
construction
on-site
trailers.
supervision of the
It is
job.
odd because
There
when you go
is
as
on-site supervision of the job. They have a job site superintendent. They have multiple foremen because they have multiple tasks that are going on.
So get a
running
trailer
different
there.
phases. That is there because it is not a city project. The city cannot force them to have a trailer on site. That is their decision to make.
I've never seen that before. That's okay.
we
I
can
don't wanna
always
take up
work
any
that
more time.
into the code if we need to, because I do see your point.
You
It's
need
good to have a
drawings,
place.
You need drawings
it's a good
there.
place to
You need
meet,
to know what you're building. You need a job site trailer.
Yeah, I mean, when inspecting, we often would go in the trailers and discuss these things with the contractor over the table
Exactly.
with plans, and instead of just a hood of a truck, which I guess you could do too. But
Not on a job of this
So-
size that went through so much pre-planning.
yeah, so and on this, just I want to move on from this issue, but on the path issue, I do think we need to work out the ownership. But again, I want to, especially when you're talking about 6 inches of CR6, that's quite a path. That is a road, and again, we need to keep in mind that this was originally set to be a park. And I understand your ideals, and if you're really, if the city is definitely going to has a 3-year maintenance program they're going to stick to, I mean, believe me, I know. I do maintenance during my day job, and there's what you want to do, and there's what actually happens in terms of ideally, yes, we want to do maintenance even on our storm drain systems, but often that doesn't happen. It's often just when problems pop up, you go out there and take care of them. If we actually have a program where we absolutely have a 3-year plan on our sewer infrastructure, or is this just an ideal that you want to try to strive for?
No, we do. We recently hired an assistant superintendent for utilities, and that is a core part of his function, using an asset management approach, whereby you're doing more preventative maintenance than restorative work, which is like super expensive versus doing general PM. So his responsibilities will be to do exactly that, to set up a program and to prosecute that type of program system-wide.
Well, it's just maybe looking at,
Speaking.
I could add to what Director Johnson said. They are currently doing that in most cases, because what we have found is that the first, we deal in a world of liability, okay? We get cited, we get complaints, we get claims, okay? The first question that is asked is, do you have a maintenance program? And by having a maintenance program in place, we're able to show that we are being proactive towards spills, towards clogs, towards those kind of operations. So while we have brought on board a assistant superintendent who is going to be responsible for many of those things, that is already ongoing. And I have read, because I get unfortunately dragged into a lot of these things, I have read time after time the statements from our staff. Yes, we have a maintenance program. Yes, that line that clogged, we cleaned most recently and inspected it on such and such a date. So that is in place. The goal is every 3 years. I verified that with our superintendent 3 days ago because of your question to me, Alderman Savage, that was what their goal was, and that they try to stay to that, and where they have issues, they do it more frequently.
okay, all right, well, so, again, I'll just say, keep in mind, this is, again going to be a future park. If you could explore some alternatives, I think maybe utilize some of planning and zoning's landscape architects to see if they can get something, if something can handle a fire truck, see if that technology will work for us and better blend in with the park. The other thing is, if you could look at the stormwater aspect of that path, because again, I don't want to be inviting a problem in the future where that path invites runoff, where the runoff follows the path and goes into Hunt Meadows and creates another headache for us. So if you could just take a look at that aspect, I think that'd be good. I'd like to move on to the other sediment control issues because we're running out of time today because we have to end at 5. So, Director, I definitely agree with what you had to say about the resilience. We do need to update our code. I look forward to working with you next term on that. One idea I had that I might like to do at some point next term, next year perhaps, is setting up some kind of stormwater resilience panel or commission to kind of take a deep dive on some of our stormwater code and see how we can update them. And hopefully yourself and Ms. Godd and Mr. Bryce, if you're still here, I don't know how much longer you have, but could help out the, what's that? Hours. So you have to get a jersey. That's what they do at the county. But all right, so yeah, so that's something I definitely want to look at and look forward to. I'm glad that's on your mind. And I'm also glad to hear that you've been developing some new procedures. Be happy to take a look at those, and even if you want to share them with the committee before a draft, be happy to do that. And but I do want to. There are a few things related to this, though. I definitely understand. So, and again, I don't know what's in the procedures, but one of the things and I understand when you were saying the 9 days it took to get compliance is you wanted to get a better understanding. But there are a couple things coming out of that because I'm wondering why a stop work order wasn't issued as a part of that to essentially say, because there were things, I know you wanted to get a comprehensive understanding, but there are things that they could have done that they should have had done to begin with, which is required per the plans, per the code, like the sill fence maintenance, the holes in the sill fence where it's propped up, stabilization, they should have done. That doesn't really take that long of a period to address. And so that's one of my concerns is we're not utilizing all of those tools. The point of the stop work order is to say, look, has to be your top priority. You're already in violation. You're clearly not doing what you, in terms of the developer, is not doing what you're required to do. We're going to make you do it because you can't do anything else and accept that. Because 9 days it's a very long time. We used to never give them that long to correct anything. It was usually 24, 48 hours because, again, frankly, they're supposed to do this stuff anyway. Every single day they're supposed to maintain these things. So, but it's not just staff. I mean, on the one hand, I still have questions about how staff missed some of these violations and why, because clearly some of them were in place for a while. I don't know if it's a problem with the inspection frequency not being enough, which I know we've resolved, which is good, or was it just a matter of inadequate training or some other issue? But I'm not clear on why some of these things were missed in the whole timeline. And again, maybe are these things that you're trying to address with the new procedures, or are there other things that you've been able to uncover?
There are things Alderman, there are things I'm trying to address. I'm addressing with the new procedure. I think it is difficult to do a forensic assay as to really why specific things were missed, and I'm not sure that that's something that's a good investment of my time in that way. But I could look at the existing procedures and say that to improve this, or to ensure or to minimize the chance of this occurring, what do we need to do? And that is reflected in the draft document, which I'd be glad to share with you. It's not, we still have a little more work to finalize it, but I'd be glad to share it with you to take a look at it, see if you have any input into it. But I think that really it comes down for major sites, particularly sites which share the watershed with other sites. And like, for instance, one of the problems that we're going to face at 39 Hudson is that within that watershed, there's the public works yard where work is being done. But there are also sites that the county is working on and other properties are working on that are contributing turbidity to the water. So after a rain event, if someone came to the public works, the water reach within the public works site, they could ostensibly claim that the public works site has deficient controls because you're finding turbidity in the water and it's impossible really to figure out exactly the origin. It's sort of like a non-point sort of pollution. So to mitigate the chance of that occurring, we want to make sure that our site is buttoned up as tightly as possible. So we have very rigorous controls, very rigorous procedures, totally transparent, so that it's really clear that the turbidity that exists is not coming from the city site. It's not coming from our sites. And pretty much if we follow this for large developments, even though Annapolis is fairly built out, we don't have very many large developments currently being built. We may have one or two that may be in the offing. But if those are followed, again, you would sort of make this entire problem disappear. Because really it would be the best way to sort of, is not really to debate with the person as to where the turbidity is coming from, because it's non-point. It's really hard to win that argument, if you will. But if you're able to see that the controls are in place and everyone can see what I'm seeing, what Sam sees, what other people are seeing,
Yeah.
I think what you're seeing, I think that helps.
Well, yeah, it does. But I guess what I'm hearing from you is that you've really addressed the frequency issue, which is a good first step. But I'm still don't have confidence that staff is going to be able to pick out these issues moving forward, because that's been my impression based on how long some of these violations appear to have been in place, is that either the inspections weren't thorough enough in terms of walking through the whole site, or the inspectors just didn't realize these were violations and needed to get taken care of. So that's one thing I'm not sure. Has that been addressed? It sounds like you're not quite sure that was even a problem. But
I don't think that was the problem. In speaking with our staff, I think that the stormwater engineers and our environmental compliance inspectors are very knowledgeable and very experienced. And in my conversations with them, I did not have any concerns with their competence or level of knowledge.
The sill fence that was propped up with the sticks. I mean, again, that's one example. It didn't happen overnight. I mean, so again, how could the staff miss that if that was in place for so long? Is it the inspection quality? Is it frequency? Or they just, again, didn't pick up? That's what I'm not clear on.
I'm not really sure why. I mean, it's a good thing. I mean, I would have pointed that out, but I mean, it seemed to be like on the wrong side of the flow or something like that. And maybe a judgment was made that it's not pristine, but it's not
because that's what
problem.
I'm not sure how we.
But I'm speculating on that. I didn't discuss it.
But that's what I'm not sure how we can. We can change the standards, increase the standards, but if staff is not holding these standards.
But I'd be the first to know. I'd be the first to know because I'm involved with the new process. So that if someone is not following that, then we would have to have a conversation about what's going on.
Need to know, but. Because there's also, in terms of what we talked about, I think one of your emails you talked about, do you still believe you can only enforce what's in the plans themselves?
I think that is, I think that's really what we have to enforce. I mean, the opportunity that the city has to get what it wants occurs during the plan development phase. Once the plans are approved by the Planning Commission and a permit is issued, it's a reckless approach to attempt to try to bootstrap other things into it. You have an opportunity to get what you want when you're reviewing the plans. Once the plans are approved and permitted, I think your chances of increasing the level of what's in the plan seem to be, a developer could push back with great success and say,
I disagree, and that seems like a fundamental problem because the code does not say you're limited to what's in the plans. The code, even in the approved plans on their grading plan, it says, and this is coming right from the standard responsibilities notes on page 2 of the plans, approval of the plan does not relieve the developer from complying with federal, state, or county requirements pertaining to environmental issues. And then he says in the code itself, erosion control practices consistent with standards and specifications shall be installed to minimize soil and water loss. So that's consistent with standards and specifications, which are the state standards. There are other provisions too that clearly make that point, that we're not limited to what's in the plans. That just sets a floor, but the ceiling are the state standards and specifications which we've adopted. And so I don't know how, that's how it's worded in the code, so I don't know do we need to go to the law office to get this clarified for Public Works, so that, because there are issues with the access, the frequent use, high use path, which I've talked about before. Standards and specs say quite clearly those frequently traveled lanes are supposed to be stabilized. But that's one of the problems, is there was so much effort, so much grief for us to get enforcement, for us to go above and beyond what's in the plans in terms of stabilization, that we shouldn't have to put forward that much effort. It should just be staff automatically saying, we're going to utilize, like it says, liberally construe this code to meet the goals and intention of the code, which is clearly stated. I don't know how to get around that, but that seems to be one of the fundamental issues, because that path could have been stabilized. They have mulch, a huge pile of mulch right on the site. Why wasn't that done? Asked for earlier. There are steep slopes on the site, which I saw after staff inspection. Ms. Gould invited me out, which were not stabilized. And I think the sediment, one of the staff said, well, then we need to do that because they have a sediment trap on site, which captures it. But the problem is, if you have slopes that are not stabilized interior, any surface is not stabilized, that's going to fill up the sediment trap. It's going to send more fines down off site. But it's just a matter of that I don't know, that's my frustration, if that makes sense, is it doesn't seem like we're
No, I
really
understand what
applying
you're
these standards.
saying, Alderman, but this is what I would say with codes, that the city's opportunity to get what it wants occurs at the time we are approving the plans. If you approve the plans for gravel, you couldn't come, it's not realistic, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm not trying to act like one, but I don't think that it would be fair or that you could prevail if you said, I want diamond chips as opposed to gravel.
Frankly, it doesn't matter, not to be rude, but what you feel or think is fair, that's what's in the code. Is the code says they have to adhere to the standards and specifications regardless of what's in the plans.
Right, so and I think we're saying, I'm saying that the time when you are able to sort of determine what you want on the site is when you are reviewing the plans.
But
that's the time when you do it.
You can't predict everything in the plans. You can't. That's why they have standards and specifications, and that's why the code allows you to go above and beyond. You can't. Just like we didn't anticipate the amount of disturbance on this path that was going to be a frequently high-use path. Yes, the plans, frankly, should have had that built in there, and a lot of times they do, but this one didn't for whatever reason. But if that's causing pollution, our goal is to do whatever we need to do to stop that pollution, even if it's not in the plans. And so, I don't know. I'll talk with the city attorney about how can we more clearly word this. But I feel like it's already pretty well stated in here that we need to go above and beyond for the code. So I don't know what else to. I guess I'll talk to the city law office about that in the future.
Okay.
In what are you reading there?
Yeah, it's in 1708, 160 erosion control general requirements.
Okay.
And it's in the standards and specifications right on the plan. I'm sorry, not the standards and specs. The standards and responsibilities note right on the plans. There's also 1708, 200 state and federal standards for erosion control in our code.
So I know this isn't a conventional project, but in a conventional project, unless the contractor qualified those out, he owes us what that says. So it's a lot of exposure there that he would have to resort to that. Unless someone qualified that what's on the plans is it, and somebody priced those documents and that's what's contractually agreed. I don't see or hear that in this very non-conventional project.
Again, because it's not a city project. I mean, the soil conservation plans are reviewed by the Anne Arundel County Soil Conservation District, and they are a minimum. And if again, I'm saying that the correct procedure, the one that keeps the city out of court, I would suspect, right, and sort of makes it clear to our inspectors and to the developer, because the inspector, you really don't want the inspector taking discretion with inspections, because some may be severe, some may be less so. So you're sort of building in an inconsistent level of inspection, largely because the specifications, if you will, are not clear. So the way in which you ensure that a product is built properly, to use that sort of parallel, or to anything is done well, is by having clear specifications as to what is required.
Correct.
And the opportunity the city has to develop those specifications is during the plan review process. That's the time when you get it done.
But those,
largely, it's not saying that every single iota will be figured out.
well, that's why they're called standard specifications, right? And I don't mean to just focusing solely on staff, because ultimately what it comes down to, the developer, this is a big developer. They do a lot of this work. They do this all the time. They know better. And frankly, with the fact that we give them any kind of latitude, any latitude is ridiculous. They know better. They have no excuse. They've done this work all the time. That's why we should not give them any first, second, third chance. No, they know better. And if they want to do work in the city, they need to stay up with our top standards. But they should also be looking at this to say, we need to go above and beyond. They have this huge pile of mulch on their site. Why aren't they using it? It shouldn't be up to us, to you all, to tell them. No, but they haven't been. So now it is up to staff to tell them. And I don't know how much we can do to really get the developer to do what they're supposed to and to go above and beyond, except send them a message, right? We need to send them a message somehow. And so I am glad to hear that more fines have been issued. But I think what I'm trying to get at is just the larger philosophical debate with how we really meet the intention of the code. And we could write things all day, but when it comes down to it, we need to make sure everything's implemented correctly. And but that's also why the code has a pretty clear goal right at the beginning of this section about what the intention, what it's supposed to accomplish. And that's where it says everything in here should be liberally construed. And I'm not really hearing that from staff in terms of that this is liberally, it's being conservatively construed if you're saying, oh, we're limited to what's in the plans, right? And that's where the developer's not going to take you to court, because if you say you have to put down diamond stone, you give them a field correction notice to do that, they're going to have to do it. Otherwise, you put a stop work order on the site and they're delayed for months while they take this to court, and they're not going to do that. So I think we need to be just more willing to kind of use our discretion. I don't know, is there anything else from the committee? I'm kind of...
Well, I agree and I agree. I mean, the construction drawings are the line in the sand, if you will, right? And we don't want a moving goalpost. But again, if those weren't qualified out in the construction documents, or, if we didn't get more specific in the construction documents in any way, then I would agree that they're held to those standards. But again, I'm not part of the project team. But this stuff shouldn't be in question right now. That's what's disturbing about this. It shouldn't be in question.
Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've heard really three main things. One, Director Johnson, my reception is that you have looked at this, you're taking it very seriously, and you're not only that, you're forward-looking about things we need to do better in the future, and I really applaud that, and I thank you for that. I think that's very good. I think there are some questions, and I really take the point that you can't have some inspectors who are really hard and onerous and to be avoided at all costs, and other staff. So there needs to be some consistency across staff. And I think that's your responsibility as director to convey that message. We follow the code. I think what Alderman Savage is saying about, I think there is an obligation to fill in the blanks, and when we do, we go above, not go below. When City Manager Gerald had the position and we were talking about stormwater management criteria, and we didn't really want to dictate new levels because we knew that some situations were different than others, but he took the road, no, we're going to go to this new higher level. That is now the new minimum standard. And I think that's some of the thing we're trying to say, this is the environment, and this is the future of our children and grandchildren, and we really do have to take it seriously. The last thing, and this might be a minor point in the context of all of these big things, and I had a conversation with the city attorney about it this morning, and my two colleagues weren't at the Human Relations Commission, but boy, those of us who were running for office got terribly castigated. $2,000, that's chump change. And my question to you here, and it was to the city manager earlier today, are our fines enough to even make people take these citations seriously? I mean, that isn't a lot of money in a multi-million-dollar project. And then the question becomes immediately, if they're not enough, what would be enough? And then I think we do have some limitations from the state about how much we can do it. But I know on the standard citation form, you can make the citation daily. So even if it's a small amount, $1,000 is small really, but if you say $1,000 every day, and there's another box that you can check off that says, and you must appear in court. And that last box has gotten a lot of people's attention. We had a terrible situation in Ward 8 with an apartment complex that was way below standard, and we kept fining. But when we checked that box, you must appear in court, boy, buildings were painted and hallways were cleaned up. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is there a more potent tool we can give you and your staff to make these contractors pay attention and want to avoid us and want to avoid a citation pretty much as they can?
Alderman, yes, I think that when we rewrite the stormwater code, and we will take a look and probably make some amendments to the soil and sediment control, erosion and sediment control codes, that would be the opportunity that we have to build in more enforcement abilities, if you will. And it's always at our discretion to fine every day and something like that. But I think that much like with discipline, say with employee discipline, you don't start at the highest level unless the person is an egregious, like if you've done something totally egregious, selling drugs, fighting, or something ridiculous like that, you would go through a progressive stage. So if the developer or contractor fails to comply with the city's demands for redress of a problem, then the pain, if you will, is increased, and that's the appropriate way to use fines. We're not trying to set up an adversarial climate with any of our developers or contractors, because the only people who win in that are attorneys. No one else wins. So we really want to sort of gain compliance, but let them understand that we're not a paper tiger, if you will, that we do have the ability to cause more pain if you don't comply with what we're asking you to do. And that's sort of the approach that I prefer to take.
So is it your feeling that we've fired you and Director Giles, we fired the first warning salvo, and I hope all contractors are taking the point? Pardon?
No, he said he fired the first salvo. Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
We're taking this seriously.
They're taking it seriously. I mean, they will take it seriously.
Yeah.
And and even though we did find them, I do believe that they're objecting to it and will probably take us to court over it. But that's something that we are able to sort of deal with. But it sends the message that not only are we fair, because we didn't shoot from the hip. We took the time to assess the site, and we walked around with the super and said, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this needs to be fixed. And then we issued a fine. And listen, for these violations, we're issuing a fine. And the message, I think, that is sent is that the city is taking this seriously, and that if you do not comply, if you do not come up to the standards that we are expecting, that we do have the ability to issue daily fines. I think there's a cap on what you can fine. I'm not sure what it is. Attorney Lyles would be able to know better than I. But you could issue daily fines, and you could inspect them on a daily basis, and that's really safe for the real bad actors. And really, this contractor is not a bad actor, in my opinion. I've seen much worse. Their site was not as bad as I've seen. I've seen a lot worse.
All right, so to wrap it up, and I do hear you. I think it's good to be a reasonable, a force with the developer. But I also do think we need to keep in mind that again, the law is pretty clear on what their obligations are, and if they're not following that when they should be, and they're required to every single day, and they're not doing that, then I don't think we should be giving them any kind of latitude. If it's something they just maybe missed in a reasonable way, then sure. But in any case, what I'll just end by saying is that I'm sure you can hear my remaining frustration, but believe it or not, I'm not as frustrated as I feared I would be. I am glad, and I can definitely absolutely tell that you are taking all these concerns seriously. I'm really glad that you're working on procedures and things moving forward. So I do thank you for that, and I do look forward to working with you on overhauling the code next few years. So with that, I thank.
You two can say that with certainty.
But really, just for the record, I don't want this project run by someone in their car with a cell phone. I think it deserves on-site presence. That's just for the record, that's how I feel. I almost feel like making a motion that that's our recommendation, but it's okay. I think I made my point.
Yeah, and we really should not have to babysit. Believe me, I mean, doing all your frequent inspections is going to cost us money, but we shouldn't have to do that, right? We shouldn't even have to send out an inspector too frequently if they were doing what they're supposed to.
Yes, sir.
So in that sense, since we're spending all this money on them doing inspections, we should fine them to make up for that, frankly. But in any case, thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Were you raising your hand, Mr. Are you sure? Did you have anything else you wanted to say before we leave?
I did not. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And
So for
did you have anything else on this and also your report? We'll give you the last word in terms of your report.
My report?
General report.
Yes, so I
we only have 5 minutes
I
left.
emailed the three of you the current projects for resilience and sustainability. I will do that by Monday of every week that you will have your meeting. There's one thing, Director Johnson is still here, that is incorrect on this that I did not update, and that, because you've asked me about it a number of times, is Brewer Hill Cemetery. There has been progress there. I will allow Director Johnson to address the update.
Okay, thank you. Brewer Hill, we made really good progress with it. One of the issues, I think everyone's familiar with, but I'll just recap that quickly, is the field of remains, so many of which were unmarked. So that had sort of put the project into abeyance more than a decade ago. So what we did was we got the developer to, Mr. Hyatt, to perform a ground penetrating radar survey of the cemetery alignment. We're in the alignment within the cemetery and other areas, and we discovered that the field of remains is too significant to proceed in the manner in which was initially contemplated. So we worked out an alternative approach to conveying the stormwater and sort of stabilizing the slope in a phase one as it heads down to the College Creek. And grading permits have been submitted for that solution. They're currently being reviewed by the stormwater engineer. And our plan is to have construction begin in a little later in the year, so the plantings can be done in the fall, so that gives it the best chance of surviving, as opposed to them being planted in the summer where it's hit or miss sometimes as to whether or not they would survive. So we're close to resolving that. What we're going to do is the old permit, it's one of the legacy permits, we're going to close it. It makes no sense really to have it open. The amount of money being held is de minimis. The bond is de minimis. Everything has changed, and they're going to get a new permit, and then we'll start with a different approach to
Is that the
resolving
same
this.
owner? Is that Hyatt?
That's Hyatt,
Yeah.
yes.
What about the, thank you so much. That is a really, sacred place. What about the tombstones? The ones that moved, and who does that?
Well, that's not part of
I wouldn't
this
think. Yeah,
job
no, I know.
as
I
such,
just-
right? That's something that the cemetery board, I think, would have to
Right, but you're going to
Resolve.
stabilize the
Right,
slope.
but we will stabilize, the area that was being undermined by the flooding is going to be
Yes.
stabilized. The
Right.
pillars that were sort of migrated, or
Right.
because of the undermining, they'll be straightened, and the entire
Oh, okay, so you'll
alignment will be
straighten-
corrected.
You'll
Right,
do what you need to
Yes.
stabilize the slope.
yes.
All right, thank you.
Michael,
You're welcome.
To
Mr. Laus.
adjourn,
Oh, as long as you adjourn, yeah, I just had to let staff go, so
yeah.
you're adjourning, so that's good.
All right, thank you. Thank you for coming, and that's it. I do have some questions we could talk out offline about your report. or-
Right, I was going to encourage you, if you have it, just give me a call, and we can talk about it some more, send me an email.
Okay, and
Okay.
Dr. Nash, thank you for staying. Sorry we didn't get to the tree ordinance. We'll probably have to schedule another. We have to end at
We
5.
ran out of time. We're going to invite, we're going to,
So. Yeah, sorry. All right, so we can chat about that in a minute, but in terms of rescheduling, do I have a motion to adjourn?
the Fred, I motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 So we're going to schedule,
adjourned.
are we going to schedule a special session to